Welcome to Celestial Zodiac. Today we're exploring transit retrogrades. These type of retrogrades are one of the most talked about and most misunderstood concepts in astrology. They're often treated as disruptive events or moments when things go wrong. But in reality, transit retrogrades are part of the natural rhythm of planetary movement. They don't break life or derail progress. Instead, they change the direction and timing of how growth unfolds. Understanding transit retrogrades means understanding how astrology works in real time rather than just symbolically. To understand transit retrogrades, we first need to clarify what a transit actually is. A transit refers to the current movement of planets in the sky as they interact with your birth chart. Planets are always transiting every single day, whether we're aware of them or not. A transit simply describes where a planet is right now and how that position relates to the planets in your birth chart and your chart angles. Nothing special needs to start for a transit to exist. They are constant, ongoing, and time-based. A retrograde is not a separate event from a transit. A retrograde describes how a planet is moving during a transit. When a planet goes retrograde, it appears from Earth's perspective to slow down, stop, move backward, and then eventually resume its forward motion. This shift in motion changes how the transit behaves. All retrogrades are transits, but not all transits are retrogrades. Retrograde is a condition of movement, not a different category of astrology. This distinction is important because many people assume retrogrades are rare or isolated events. In reality, planets are always transiting your chart, and sometimes those transits are direct and sometimes they are retrograde. What changes is not whether something is happening but how it unfolds. Retrogrades slow the external pace of life and shift attention inward, toward review, reflection, and correction rather than forward momentum. Transit retrogrades feel different because they interrupt linear progress. During direct motion, transits tend to push things outward, introduce new developments, and move life forward. During retrograde motion, momentum slows, stalls, or reverses. Issues resurface instead of resolving quickly. Conversations repeat. Decisions are reconsidered. This can feel frustrating, especially in a culture that values speed and constant progress. However, this slowdown is not accidental. It is the purpose of the retrograde itself. Think of linear progress as moving straight from point A to point B. You make a plan, take steps forward, and expect steady momentum. During a transit retrograde, that straight line bends. Progress doesn't stop completely, but it no longer moves forward in a clean sequence. Instead of advancing, you're asked to pause, reassess, or return to something you thought was already handled. For example, you may be in the middle of starting a project and suddenly find that information is missing, timing feels off, or decisions need to be reconsidered. Nothing is wrong, but the forward push no longer works the way it did before. Another example is, imagine you're applying for a job. You submit your application, go through an interview, and expect the next step to be an offer. During a transit retrograde, instead of moving forward, the employer circles back. They ask follow-up questions, delay the decision, or reopen the role. The process doesn't collapse, but it doesn't advance linearly either. You're pulled back into review instead of moving ahead. That is a retrograde interrupting linear progress. Linear progress assumes that once something begins, it moves steadily forward. But during a transit retrograde, progress bends back on itself, asking for review, revision, or reflection before forward motion can continue. One of the most important mechanics of a transit retrograde is the three-pass cycle. When a planet moves forward and first reaches a degree in your chart, it introduces a theme. This is often subtle and easily overlooked. When the planet stations retrograde and returns to that same degree, the theme becomes unavoidable. This is where review, reconsideration, and resurfacing occur. When the planet eventually stations direct and crosses that degree a third time, resolution or forward movement becomes possible. What feels repetitive is actually a process unfolding in stages. Here's an everyday example. Imagine you're thinking about making a change at work. During the first pass, the idea appears casually. You notice dissatisfaction or someone mentions an opportunity in passing. It registers, but it doesn't feel urgent. You move on. During the second pass, when the planet is retrograde and returns to that same point, the issue comes back. But this time it's harder to ignore. The same frustrations resurface. Conversations repeat. You're forced to re-examine what you dismissed before. You may feel stuck, undecided, or pressured to think things through more deeply. During the third pass, once the planet moves forward again and crosses that degree for the final time, clarity arrives. You may finally make the decision, take action, or move on with a clearer sense of direction. Nothing new was introduced. Understanding was completed. Here's an astrology-specific example. Let's say Mercury is transiting a degree that activates your natal Mercury. On the first pass, you receive information or start a conversation that seems minor. You note it but don't fully process it. When Mercury turns retrograde and crosses that degree again, the conversation returns. There may be misunderstandings, repeated discussions, or the need to rethink what was said. You realize the issue wasn't as simple as it first appeared. When Mercury goes direct and crosses the degree a third time, communication becomes clearer. Decisions are finalized, agreements are reached, or understanding settles in. The repetition wasn't a mistake. It was refinement. Emotionally, the first pass often feels like awareness. The second pass feels like discomfort or frustration. The third pass feels like integration. What initially appeared as a small feeling becomes something that must be processed, and eventually something that is resolved or accepted. The three-pass cycle works like an introduction, a review, and a resolution. The first pass introduces a theme, the retrograde pass forces it back into awareness, and the final direct pass allows understanding or forward movement to complete. This is why retrogrades repeat themes instead of breaking things. Retrogrades do not create new problems out of nowhere. They reveal what was incomplete, rushed, or unresolved during the first pass. Rather than collapsing structures, retrogrades expose weak points so they can be corrected. What returns during a retrograde is not random. It is relevant, unfinished, and asking for attention. Transit retrogrades become more noticeable when they activate natal planets. A transit activates a natal planet when the moving planet forms a strong aspect to it, especially a conjunction. In astrology, planets don't affect us just by being in the sky. They become noticeable when they line up with specific points in your birth chart. These alignments are called aspects. An aspect simply describes how close a moving planet is to a planet you were born with. Natal planets act like receivers. When a retrograde planet meets a natal planet, the themes associated with that natal planet become emphasized, reviewed, or reworked. This is why some people feel a retrograde intensely while others barely notice it. Without a direct natal connection, the transit remains background noise. When a retrograde conjuncts a natal planet, awareness increases before external change occurs. A conjunction happens when a moving planet reaches the same spot in the sky as one of your natal planets. It's the strongest type of contact because the two energies overlap. Instead of working separately, they blend together. Being that natal planets act as receivers, if no planet is passing close to them, nothing specific gets activated. But when a moving planet, especially a retrograde one, reaches the same position, the natal planet becomes switched on. This is when people start to notice a retrograde personally. Identity themes may come up when the sun is activated. Emotional patterns may resurface when the moon is involved. Behavior, motivation, communication, or relationships may require reassessment when personal planets are triggered. The retrograde does not demand immediate action. It asks for understanding first so that action later is more aligned. Retrogrades feel especially strong when they activate chart angles, particularly the ascendant and midheaven. The ascendant represents identity, direction, and how we engage with life, while the midheaven relates to public roles, career, and visibility. When a retrograde crosses these points, life can feel disrupted or exposed. These transits are often noticeable because they affect how we move through the world and how we are seen by others. They tend to coincide with shifts in direction rather than instant outcomes. One of the biggest misunderstandings about retrogrades comes from sign-based astrology. While sign symbolism matters, degree accuracy matters far more for transits. A retrograde does not affect everyone equally just because it occurs in a particular sign. What matters is whether the retrograde planet reaches the exact degree of a natal planet or angle in your chart. Without degree contact, the experience may be mild or barely noticeable. Astrology is personal, not universal. This is why some people feel retrogrades strongly and others do not. Those with natal planets or angles directly activated by the retrograde experience it as personal and impactful. Others may experience it indirectly or not at all. Sensitivity to transits varies from chart to chart. Intensity does not measure importance. Quiet transits can still be meaningful, and loud transits are not always disruptive. Emotionally and psychologically, transit retrogrades often trigger frustration, impatience, or anxiety. Slowed momentum can feel uncomfortable, especially when forward progress feels blocked. Retrogrades challenge the urge to push, force, or rush outcomes. They ask for reflection instead of reaction. In a culture driven by productivity, this inward turn can feel unsettling. But the discomfort is a signal, not a failure. Ultimately, transit retrogrades function as feedback loops. They highlight where awareness is needed before progress can continue. They correct trajectory rather than derail it. They remind us that timing matters just as much as action. When understood, retrogrades reduce fear and replace urgency with clarity. They are not punishments or warnings, but opportunities to recalibrate before moving forward again. Thank you for watching Celestial Zodiac. In our next videos, we'll explore shadow periods, retrogrades by sign, retrogrades by house, and how these cycles show up differently depending on the planet involved. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.